All right, well, welcome everybody. I've got a few minutes after the top of the hour, so we'll just get started. And as folks join in, I want to welcome everyone today to the Women's Forest Congress Lunch and Learn. My name is Amy Doty, and on behalf of the Women's Forest Congress Steering Committee and Advisory Council, I want to welcome y'all to our Lunch and Learn today and just really thank you for joining us. I'm joining y'all from Annapolis, Maryland, the traditional territories of the Piscataway peoples. It's a pleasure to be with y'all and learn more about the research and analysis on diversity representation in the U.S. forest sector workforce today. Before we get started, I want to make sure that to remind folks to follow us on social media. We're active on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we also have a LinkedIn networking group. So feel free to find us on LinkedIn and that networking group and engage in discussions through that group. I also want to go over some real quick housekeeping for the event today. We are recording today's session and it will be available for on-demand viewing in the near future. So be on the lookout for that and share with your network and your colleagues. Closed captioning is available if needed, and you can toggle that on through the toolbar on Zoom. Feel free to use the chat. Folks are dropping in where they're zooming in from today. So just use that for sharing where you're joining us from and to network with other participants. Be sure to stay on mute throughout the presentation, but we will have some time at the end to come off mute if you have questions or want to raise any comments for our speakers. We'd love to see everybody's lovely faces if you feel comfortable turning on your video, but please do what makes you feel most comfortable. You can also change your view settings to up in that right-hand corner of your Zoom screen with that view icon. And then finally, if y'all have any questions or need any help during the event today, do not hesitate to reach out to myself or Eliza Meyer in the chat. All right. So let's get on with the show. It's my pleasure to introduce y'all to our speakers today, Jana Korhonen and Rajat Panwar. Jana is a current member of the Women's Forest Congress Advisory Council, and she currently serves as a researcher with the Oak Ridge Institute for Science and Education, which is a research program facilitated by the U.S. Department of Energy. She's located at the USDA Forest Service Southern Research Station down in North Carolina, working as part of the Forest Economics and Policy Unit. Jana holds a PhD in Forest Economics and Management from the University of Helsinki in Finland. Her current research focuses on delving into impacts of policies, environmental shocks, and societal changes on the forest sector and diverse stakeholders, including forest sector employees, and how that forest sector product markets behave and are affected by the ongoing changes. I also want to introduce you to Rajat Panwar, who is an associate professor of responsible and sustainable business at the Oregon State University. He's edited 2 books and published over 100 scholarly outputs that have been published in high-impact outlets. His work has been cited in influential media, including The Guardian, NPR, and Forbes. In the diversity realm, Rajat's article, Why Getting Someone's Name Right Matters, published in the Harvard Business Review, has played an important role in highlighting the cultural significance of people's names and explaining why people's names should not be casually anglicized. Following their presentation today, we'll have some time for Q&A with our speakers. So as you said, please drop your questions in the chat throughout today or raise your hand when we get to that point and we can bring you off mute to ask your questions. So now please join me in welcoming Jana and Rajat.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amy, for the introduction, and give me a couple of minutes. I'm trying to share my screen. Does it look okay to you now?
Looks great. Fine. Thanks, Jana.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. So my presentation follows a very, very standard format. It's outlined here. So I will give a introduction, and then I will go over the previous literature and introduce our research questions and go over our key results and some conclusions. And like Amy told, then afterwards we will have time for an open discussion. So I hope you will send us many questions. So this presentation is based on a research article that was published not that long time ago, it's titled Gaps in Diversity Representation and Data Insufficiencies in the US Forest Sector Workforce Analysis. I want to say thanks to all the co-authors, Roger Panwar, Jesse Henderson, Katie Fernholz, Sakia Leggett, Elisa Meyer, and Arvind Putta. And I want to say much welcome to Rajat. I invited him here with me. Rajat and I have known each other for over a decade, and we have been collaborating in different things. He's very, very insightful person and very dedicated sustainability professional. So while I will be guiding you through this paper and presentation, I hope that in the end, we can engage Roger to the discussion and he can maybe address some of your questions. So thank you very much for being here. I want to highlight that this paper is it's an open access paper, so it's available online for everybody. It's not behind any paywalls, etc. So you can go and read it. And this paper was part of a special issue called Forest Science Navigating Sustainable Development, or third task. And this means that try to understand how forest science can support evidence-based decision-making for sustainable development across globe. And I go briefly over some key concepts that are very important for this article or presentation. So diversity is the presence of a wide range of human differences within a sector. Representation, the action of speaking or acting on behalf of someone. And equity in representation focuses on ensuring fair and just access to opportunities. And then there are multiple other concepts that are super important and related as well, but I just want to highlight these three at this point. And so there are some others, or it's a emerging literature, like the studies on representation. And when I came to this country, I came to USA less than 3 years ago, so I really wanted to understand that who I working with, who are these people who are working in forest sector or associated sectors, and I started reading literature, and this is a brief overview of it. Most of the literature on representation is from public sector and especially from USDA Forest Service. And Westphal et al. Have concluded that diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts have shown success at the leadership level at the USDA Forest Service, but these diversity targets have not been met in frontline positions and in research and development. And Deva recently found significant variations in career performance within forest sector, Forest Service based on race and gender. So especially women in color didn't progress in their careers as quickly as other people. And then there is literature from education sector concluding that the transition towards diversity and gender inclusion in university education has made positive strides. So more diverse people are getting educated at the university. However, minorities are poorly represented in undergraduate natural resource majors, or maybe we should say that certain groups are minoritized in this field, and forestry disciplines are lacking behind the most in this regard. But I saw that there is a research gap, like there was not a conclusive study about representation of private US forest sector employees. And I thought that maybe this is a place where I could contribute a little bit. And I really, like I told, I wanted to understand who is working in the sector. And so that is the first research question. Like I just wanted to look into that. But then as a researcher, I also wanted to know that what kind of data are available and how these data are generated and how they could be integrated into our research so that we could get better idea about who is benefiting from forests through employment. Because we use this data for a lot of like a strategic decision making and create models that inform policies. So it's quite important to understand how these data are created so that we can derive responsible results and use the data responsibly. Our data and approach, we used only publicly available data sources, so organizational and labor associated data sources are not included in this research. And data are presented at 3 complementary levels. First is industry, and at the industry level, we include forestry and logging, wood products manufacturing, and paper product manufacturing. I wanted to include also like service-based industries, recreation, and then these emerging industries like nature-based finance, but unfortunately there was no data for it. Then, because within industry, there are very many different kind of jobs and roles, so I added this occupational layer to look at what the representation looks like in different jobs. And then one, in my opinion, very interesting approach is business ownership. And the following diversity dimensions are included in this presentation. So gender in the binary sense, men and women, and their race and ethnicity mostly include Black, Asian, White, Hispanic, Latino, because limited data were available for American Indian and Alaska Natives and other ethnicities. And then I have numbers for foreign-born employees, which is quite a broad group, including legally admitted immigrants, refugees, temporary residents, such as students and temporary workers, and undocumented immigrants. And key findings. So these are the kind of take-home messages that we derived from the analysis. Firstly, there are significant disparities in diversity and representation within the private forest sector, especially regarding gender and race. And these disparities exist across various domains, including different forest industries, job roles, and business ownership structures. And then thirdly, the workforce data that is accessible are inadequate to keep pace with changing socioeconomic landscape. And now I go over the more detailed results. So this first slide is just to show the general trends, what has happened in the US forest sector, private forest sector in terms of employment. So the black line is the aggregate number, like all these industries together. And as you can see, it has declined over years, but then there's a little bit of variation between industries, like in orange, paper manufacturing, and in purple, logging have been declining steadily. And then in wood products industry, the workforce has increased over the past years, actually. And this is about the women representation. As you can see, the representation has remained fairly stable. There's some fluctuation, but it has not increased, but it has not decreased. And there is, again, variation between different industries. The black line above is the aggregate manufacturing total. So you can see that forest sector, the women representation forest in forest sector is lower than in manufacturing on average. And this is like a reference, especially for those who are not so familiar with the US forest sector or employment in USA. So this is the representation of the total employed workforce. So Black and African American share of Black or African American employees was about 12% in 2021, Asian 7%, white consisted of 78%, Hispanic and Latinos 18%, and foreign-born labor force accounted for 17% of the labor force. So this is to give some reference to the numbers from forest industry. So first is the logging, and as you can see, the Black and African American representation is quite low. It was about 5% in 2021. White employees were dominating, and about 8% were Hispanic and Latinos. The Asian representation was so low that there were no numbers, and no numbers from other kind of ethnicities or races either. Wood products manufacturing, the Black African American representation was about 10%, but similar Asian representation was quite low, white dominating, and Hispanic and Latinos accounted for about 1/5 of the labor force. And similar numbers existed in paper manufacturing industry as well. And then at the occupational level, like I explained what is the data structure. So I collected data for 3 occupational groups, including natural resources occupations, management occupations, and production occupation. So natural resources occupation include all the kind of farming, fishing, and forestry occupations. And from that group, I selected occupations that are most directly linked with forest sector. And this includes forest and conservation workers, who are those who work under supervision and perform manual labor tasks that are very necessary to develop, maintain, restore, and protect diverse ecosystems and gather non-timber forest products. Then there are supervisors that directly supervise these activities and coordinate these activities. And then logging workers, who obviously are those who log trees. And in management occupations, it covers executives, legislators, managers, administrators, and directors. And under this group, I focus on conservation scientists and foresters as like a detailed occupation. And in production occupation, well, those are those whose tasks are related to mechanical or physical or chemical transformation of materials or component into products. And there are some machine workers included in this group. And first, women representation in this occupation. So women share is about 6% of natural resources occupations on average. In this detailed forest sector occupation, their share varies. In logging, yeah, it's low, but in forest and conservation workers, the representation has increased over time. Now it's about 1/3. Yeah, it's still low, like compared to the general population, but it's been going up. In management occupation, on average, women account for more than 50% of the workforce. And in conservation scientists and foresters, the share is 36% at the moment, going up over time. And in production occupations, there's a little bit variation, like it's about 1/3 in all the production occupations, but then there's a variation like in sewing and woodworking and paper machine workers. And then some key insights on the racial and ethnicity representation among the forest and conservation workers. And in the brackets, you can see the share of employees in 2021. And these pink arrows indicate the comparison to the situation in 2005. And share of Black employees has increased. Like in 2021, it was 10%. The share of white employees decreased. There is again no data for Asian or Native employees. Share of Hispanic and Latino workers increased, and it's about 1/3. And share of foreign-born workers has also increased quite a lot. And this profession is, or the job, like, was quite interesting because of all the foreign-born employees, 50% were women, like of all the foreign-born employees. In natural resources occupations, like it's very high share of foreign-born labor force. Like at the moment, it's about 27%, and this is significantly higher than in the workforce in general. Majority of foreign-born employees are men and Latinos, and there's like increasing dependency on the foreign labor force in so-called low-skill, non-agricultural positions. And there is this H-2B visa program that you can employ temporary workers. I don't like this low-skill term because actually these people who work on the ground are very skilled. But yes. And then some insights on the race and ethnicity representation among conservation scientists and foresters. The share of Black conservation scientists and foresters was like very low or non-existent during the 2021. So this profession or occupation doesn't include university professors or people like me who come through marriage. So it's just one group, and Hispanic and Latino employees accounted 5% of the employees. Share of white was very high, 95%. And I showed earlier that the share of women has increased in this profession, but as you can see, it's mostly white women who enter this labor force. And there were no foreign-born people or no data on that. And then a couple of words about business ownership. I think this is like quite a fascinating topic. It has not studied very much in forest sector, and business owners and entrepreneurs have a significant role in creating household income and in impacting natural resources management decisions, as well as community behaviors and values. So that's why I think this is quite the important topic. So some insights by race and gender. These stats are for the year 2020. Those were the newest available numbers that I found. White people own almost all the businesses, especially in forestry and logging. And in wood product manufacturing, the white ownership accounts for 95%, and in paper product manufacturing, about 84%. Hispanics and Latinos own about 4% of the wood products manufacturing and paper products manufacturing, and quite a tiny 0.02% of firms in forestry and logging, despite they like Hispanic and Latinos account for quite a large share of that workforce. American Indian, Alaska Natives, Asian, and Black African American individuals own less than 1% of businesses. So I'm not sure if they are represented at all. And here are some statistics regarding women ownership across different racial and Hispanic ethnic categories. And as you can see, Asian women and Black and African American women own like very small percentage, 0.1% according to this statistic. White women own 6% of the wood product firms and about 11 paper product firms. There was no like data for logging sector that I could report. And majority of these women who own businesses are non-Hispanic. And there were a lot of like missing data, and many times the numbers were withheld due to data quality concerns. So, and I wanted to include a paper that I didn't write myself, but I think it's quite an interesting paper about barriers that exist to inclusive business ownership. Ellis et al. Published this article last year, and they studied experiences of new and minority groups as business owners in the forestry and logging sector and identified several structural and operational barriers. So they study cover only this one industry, forestry and logging, and they collected data from Florida and Georgia. But I think it gives an idea what could be the potential barriers, why the business ownership is not more inclusive. So according to them, the main barriers are, well, firstly, recruiting quality employees is challenging as job seekers prefer established businesses. Secondly, startup costs are high and obtaining loans is more difficult for Black and Hispanic owners. This has been also concluded in the general economic literature. Then building connections and reputation is harder for new and non-traditional owners. And obviously these connections and reputation matters so much how well you will do. Then increasing business cost and high insurance rates are a barrier. They kind of reflect the general economic conditions. Then also gaps in mechanic and accounting knowledge are additional challenges. So conclusions. So the main data gaps exist are like the data are often very aggregated and there is practically no regional data. And when we think about the USA, it's a very large country and the conditions vary very much across the landscapes. Data coverage is quite poor most of the time, and there is underrepresentation of different racial and multiracial, ethnic and gender identities, and it's kind of intersectional data that combine these different dimensions is practically missing. There was some data for the business ownership, but otherwise not so much. And concerns about data quality and privacy hinder the publication of numbers for specific communities and especially Native people. And in my opinion, kind of combating these problems, data-related problems calls for interdisciplinary efforts combining social and data sciences. And so what are the managerial implications of these findings? Well, it's quite hard to get a very good, clear picture who are represented and who are not in the US forest sector. And that's why it's also quite hard to understand who actually benefits from forest through employment in private sector, especially. And I thought it was quite interesting, like our data gave some indication that the representation is more prominent in roles involving human interaction than in roles that relate to inanimate things and mechanical systems. And this is also, that is discussed in the general kind of business and economics literature, that men and women tend to like different kind of tasks, and these data systems focus very much on traditional industrial boundaries and roles. So if we, like, it could be good to develop better data so that we really understand who is working and affiliated with forest sector. And like, we saw that the employment has been decreasing, but at the same time, the industrial output has not decreased that much. And this is because there's more innovation, there's technologies, mechanization going on. And I think these developments pose both threats and opportunity for inclusiveness in forest sector. Opportunity in the sense that they enable more diverse people to enter these roles because you don't need to lift things and like that. There are less physical barriers, but threat comes from the fact that many of the engineering disciplines are not very inclusive either. So how this all will play together, I'm not so sure. So I have a lot of ideas what could be studied in the future, but I just want to highlight one that I think is very interesting and important. Like, I think we should think about how work is evolving because of technology, demographic changes, cultural changes, and all these environmental changes, and what are the implications of those for employment and equity in the forest sector. And also, we still could understand better that how we could responsibly and reliably quantify these impacts or these developments. And no research comes without limitations. And our research really explored the quantitative open access data or workforce. And I want to highlight that we acknowledge that this is only one approach to the topic. And we are not able to capture qualitative aspects such as workplace culture and experiences of employees. And they are super important for understanding inclusivity. And that's why I want to, conclude with a slide. There's access to a survey that is conducted by Inclusion Council and Arkansas Center for Forest Business. And in this survey, they really try to understand this kind of cultural aspects and also other HR-related issues and record employees' experiences. So please take a moment and look into that. Okay, and this is all I have for today, and I am very happy to open the floor for discussions or comments or reflections. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jana. And I see some conversation in the chat about the survey. We'll be putting that link in the chat. And then at the end of the presentation as well, there will be an opportunity to see that QR code again. Yeah, so now we're going to open up the floor for questions. And so just as a reminder, please feel free to put questions into the chat and I will read them out to our presenters. Or if you want to raise your hand or come off mute and ask a question directly, that's an option as well. So I did see one question in the chat and a little bit of conversation about it, about the gap in representation of women and the drop-off as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think there was an asterisk, Jana, that you had on the slide about women's representation between 2005 and 2021. And you said that in 2020, there had been 13% representation and then it dropped to 6%. And so people were wondering if you had an insight or guess about what might be causing that drop off for first line supervisors, particularly during the pandemic.
Yeah, this is something I noticed in the data, and unfortunately, I don't have better insights to that, but our kind of analysis just showed that women in that sort of positions, working in this kind of supervisory positions, were hit by COVID more. This kind of variation I didn't see in other occupations that I included in the study.
Great, thanks. Someone's asking a question. As a recruiter in the forestry industry, what are some ways to help promote diversity during the hiring and recruiting process?
Yeah, I could maybe, Roger, would you like to respond to that? I can throw the ball
Yeah,
to you.
thank you. Good morning, everyone. This is a really difficult question and a very complex one that I think as a group can be unpacked better. But just based on my experience in the sector, I think there's a lot of intention, like goodwill among many companies to enhance diversity, and in most cases, gender diversity. But it is not coming through as well. So the question is asked again and again, like, what can we do better? And from the research side of things, we don't have very good answers, unfortunately, what works better than the others. But I am just a few things that I have gleaned based on my conversations in the sector is, on top of everything, what comes across is to many people of, call them, diverse background, that the sector overall is not very welcoming. So I think there needs to be some work done in order to frame the culture, not only shape the culture, but actually frame the shaping of that culture positive in the minds of potential candidates entering the workforce. That is one. The second is that oftentimes what we have also seen is that diversification across the industry is not just for a sector, but for a sector in particular. The act is done in a very patronizing way. And that is like, oh, I am here and I am going to diversify. And this act as if I am the change maker, that is turning off a lot of people. I speak with young executives in the industry, and one person recently told me that they they have been having lots of concerns about whether they are in that position because they are good, or is it because of the explicit DEI strategies of those corporations. In fact, I was speaking with Jana the other day. I have sometimes felt that I get these invitations all the time, and often I wonder that, did I get this invitation because of being a person of color, or did I get this invitation because of my professional standing in the field? And Yana, as a friend and as a collaborator, said it cannot be the case. You have 2 PhDs, you have done all this work. It must be your professional standing. And then I reflect back and I say, if someone like me, who, assuming Yana is correct, has all these credentials, then if I can have that kind of an imposter syndrome, quote unquote, am I the diversity hire? Then think about the persons who are already having it because of other considerations in their professional situation. So it's a very difficult situation to make people feel that they are there not because of DEI, but because of who what they bring to the table in terms of skills and all that. So these are the two things that I can think of based on my recent work. But of course, there are lots of other ways to do it. I am big on raising a flag against very explicit DEI policies. I think what I'm seeing is there is a little bit of a, backfiring happening there. So I don't know if I'm really answering the question, but I wanted to share this perspective while I had the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Someone's asked a question about the increasing mechanization and innovation in the sector, and how I think we've talked about how that can pose both threats and opportunities in relation to inclusivity and diversity, and would like to hear some more thoughts about what those threats are, how to address them, and what the opportunities might be as well.
Yes, so I hope I understand the question correctly. So who are kind of involved in this developing the mechanization and innovation? Yeah. So of course, if you look at like a lot of the innovation happens in the educational institutes, and then you can go into like what the literature says about who are involved in education, and then it doesn't look that it's super diverse. And I think from the innovation perspective, so that the innovation should be inclusive, it requires that quite diverse mindsets are incorporated in these processes. Because it also, like, who is there, we come there as a human being, we come as a whole person, so we are shaping the processes and the products or services that can come out of through these innovation talks and processes. And yeah, it is a good question. Like, I have better understanding who these people are in the context of Finland. But I'm not so sure about who are the people in USA. I think it's one of those very emerging sectors. There is a lot of, because now many technologies are already in the phase that they can be applied in practice. And it seemed like that quite the diverse people are getting involved or using these technologies, but I'm still afraid, especially when it comes to the manufacturing and the traditional manufacturing, it's the same people, like very engineer-driven innovations that's not very inclusive. It's like a lot of men there doing great things. And I wonder if there were more diverse mindset, maybe also we could have a greater societal or environmental impact. But this is just speculative. Answer is, I don't know who these people are. Do you have, Rajat, any other additional insights?
I do not, and I will be honest, I got distracted by the chat going on, which is very interesting conversation between some people. So I did not hear the question. But do you mind, Eliza, repeating it, please?
Yeah. The question was that Jana has mentioned that there's increasing mechanization and innovation in the sector, which compose both threats and opportunities for inclusivity. And so the questioner would like to hear more about how we can best address those threats and then leverage the opportunities that could come from that as well. So I think part of it is also thinking about what threats mechanization might have for like total employment numbers and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. FAO was recently doing a report on the role of innovation. That is going to be the theme of this year's State of the World's Forest report, which will come out, I think, in the month of July. And their focus is on innovation. And a few of us from Oregon State University were part of that report writing. And the downside of innovation came up repeatedly. And so not so much from the gender side of things, but at a global level, there is real concern that some of the disadvantaged communities will become even more disadvantaged because of these high-tech innovation. And the reasons could be obvious, and they include from who is really prepared to take advantage of those new science and new technologies. So as far as this assumption that there will be implications for disadvantaged communities, absolutely yes. Where they will be, we don't know, because the other side of the argument is that, well, in some places, innovation is making the lives of the floor workers safer, and some of the work that is considered, quote unquote, this is not my word, but quote unquote, the low skilled work that was also on one of our slides, that it can be given to a robot or other automating. So there could be that part of it, that it will make jobs little easy for some people and their lives easier. But there's absolutely no doubt that there will be some sort of displacement, and the vulnerable communities will be at a greater risk. Gender-based could be understood by the same extension, but I'm not so clear on that part.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, but then there's a lot of work that needs to be done on ground, like we saw in our statistics that certain type of jobs, very field-intensive, labor-intensive jobs are very dependent on foreign labor force already now. And we know that in the future there's more and more like competition for labor, but I don't think many environmental threats, and we have to treat certain landscape against fire, etc. So I also see like these technologies can help to mitigate some of the environmental challenges or threats. Like it's definitely an opportunity as well. And I am kind of not too worried about that technologies would replace people. I think that like what we have seen in the past, when we have introduced technologies, it has just increased jobs. But like what Roger was saying, the composition of jobs may change, and you need certain skills, you need access to education, etc., to benefit from the change. So that's something we should look into it more, in my opinion.
Great, thank you. All right, well, I think we have time for one or maybe two more questions. And I think we've gone through all of the ones that I saw in the chat. So this is an opportunity if anyone wants to put one else in the chat, put another one in the chat. Otherwise, feel free to come off mute and ask a question directly of our presenters. I also have a question if people need a couple minutes to think. But I was wondering if you've seen anything about sort of the relationship between like geography and then representation in forestry related positions, and in particular relationship between geography and race. I'm just thinking about anecdotally where I think populations are, and especially non-white populations, we think of as often being more concentrated in urban areas where there might be fewer forest-related jobs available. I was wondering how that might have factored into any of your findings or anything else that you might know about that kind of topic.
Well, in this study context in the USA, their data are not, it's very aggregated, so I didn't find any forest-specific statistics for different locations, really. So it's hard to say, but at the global level, I know that the gender representation is more balanced in certain, like in an areas where you are very dependent on forest, like a little bit less developed areas where you have to pick firewood and all that. Women are like very heavily involved in forest sector, but it's quite a different discussion because the institutional and kind of socio-economic context is very different.
Yeah, thanks. Someone has a question about the groups included in the study, and they're wondering if trucking or support services like mechanics show up in the study at all.
They didn't show up because I didn't include them. It was a matter of resources what I was able to do, but it would be nice to study them as well. Like trucking is super important. Like do a study where you compare like forest sector or part of forest sector to these other sectors. That would be interesting. And one other, like trucking is relevant, but then if you take like forest products and lumber production, you also have to understand what is going on in the construction sector, that you kind of understand how this whole big system works. So this is one limitation of this research. It was very initial and first this kind of piece where you look at the representation in forest sector, but there would be a lot of room to expand.
Great. All right, well, I think, oh yeah, okay, here's another question. Someone was asking if you were able to overlay forestry jobs or if it would be possible even to overlay forestry jobs and location of hate crimes or federally mapped hate groups. And if there's any relationship between with that and minority employee ratios. Maybe that's a question about what kind of data is available.
Yeah, like I wasn't able to do that. And I know that like you could get into this kind of dynamics by deriving the data and constructing it, but it wasn't part of this study. Definitely interesting question. Like, look how the forest sector has developed in different kind of social contexts.
Great. Oh, okay. And I think this will be our last question for the day. Someone has asked whether urban forestry and arboriculture were included in this study. And I wasn't sure of the answer to that either.
Yes, so it was included in to that extent that I tried to find statistics to report, but I didn't find, like there are some statistics, but they were not comparable with the rest of the data and what I was aiming to do, so it was left out. But yeah, it would be nice to include all these emerging and like ecosystem-based jobs and then see what the forest sector looks like and understand, you know, what would be the opportunities for creating more inclusive culture in this field from like, that perspective.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you everyone that's asked a question and participated with in the chat. We're just gonna share again the survey work that's happening, and then the kind of complementary event that's being put on by the U.S. Forest and Wood Products Inclusion Council next week on the 27th. There's going to be a great panel event discussing diversity and inclusion. And so you can scan these QR codes, and then I will also put the links to both of the registrations and survey information in the chat as well. But I'd highly encourage everyone to take a second to check your availability if you can attend the panel, and then provide your input in the survey.
Thanks so much for mentioning that and making this great slide, Eliza. The panel will also be recorded in the event that you've got a conflict, so you can sign up and then automatically get the recording in your inbox.
Great. All right, well, I think we'll leave this up for a couple more minutes if people need a second to pull out your phones and scan the QR code or click on the link. But just again, like to thank everyone so much for coming today. This was a great session, and thanks to Jana and Rajat for sharing your research and insight with us. And then, yeah, once again, just stay tuned from the Women's Forest Congress for future upcoming virtual events and opportunities to get involved. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming.